Alright, time for another tutorial. In this one, I'll be going over how to create a triple jump. So, let's just get right into it. We're going to start by opening up the Gadgets menu and placing a microchip. This is for organization, which is very important when working with logic. We're going to open up this microchip and place down 2 more microchips, and then we'll go back up into the Gadgets menu and put down a selector. And in our first microchip, we're going to open back up the Gadgets menu and go over to the Gameplay Gear section and put down a puppet interface. And then we'll go to the Animate menu and put down a keyframe. This keyframe will have the first pose of our jump. And this first pose will be for our jump ascension. I've turned on Puppet Mirror as I want this to be a symmetrical pose. Now, position this however you like, and remember to always be de-animating the heels if they ever snap out of place. And you don't have to worry about posing the puppet in the air, because the physics will take care of that for you. For this pose, you generally don't want it to be too drastic, because this will be the transition from the ground to the air. And once we're satisfied with our pose, we can stop recording and create a clone of our keyframe. For this second keyframe, we'll be positioning our puppet into a second pose. This one will be for the peak of the jump, the very top of it. And always remember that for any animation to look good, it'll take some time, so make sure that you're being very patient and careful with the way you're posing everything. And there really is no right or wrong way to do this, so just mess around with it until you're happy with what you have. And once we're done recording, we're going to copy that keyframe and make a third and final pose, which this one will be for the jump descent, or basically whenever your puppet is falling. And for the purposes of this video, I'm keeping the poses very simple and basic, in an effort to keep down the overall length of this tutorial. And once we have all 3 of our poses, we're going to open up the puppet interface and attach each sensor to the keyframe that it corresponds with. The jump ascent will go into our first keyframe, the jump peak into our second, and finally, the jump descent will go into our third keyframe. And now that we have our keyframes and have wired everything up properly, we can go and test this and see that everything is working as intended. Of course, now that we're done with this, we can move on to our second jump. And we'll start making our second jump by going into our second microchip and putting down a timer. The timer is very important for the triple jump. The point of it is to require the player to time their jumps perfectly to be able to maximize their height. We're going to set the timer pretty low, enough to be able to react to it, but not too much time to be able to think about it. And we'll be copying over our first jump and placing that right above the timer. Now for this, we're going to want our second jump to be higher than the first one, and to do that, we're going to be using an advanced mover. I'm going to tweak the settings here, and what I'll do is I'll lower the dampening to allow air control while jumping, but of course, this is entirely up to you. And as you can see, we want to increase the speed on the y-axis because that is what goes up. Next, we'll close this up and go back into our microchip and open the puppet interface. In here, we'll be having it so that whenever the puppet jumps, it'll activate the advanced mover. Now this next part is the complicated part, and the logic can very quickly get messy, but I have found that this is the best way to create a triple jump. We'll start by having the timer reset itself. Resetting the timer is important so that when we repeat the jump, it won't break anything. And believe me, if you misplug anything, it will break. We'll have it so that while the output is active, it will power the second selection, which will plug up into the jump. Don't plug this into the microchip with a timer in it, because that will disable the timer. We can then connect the first output of the selector to the first jump. And this will make it so that only one jump is active at any given time. Next, we'll have it so that if our timer finishes before any input from the player, the jump will reset back to the first one. And in our second puppet interface, we're going to connect the landing impact into the first selection. And then we'll have it so that as soon as you jump the second time, it'll reset the timer. And now that we've done this, we can go back to our original microchip and open up the puppet interface for the first jump. And in here, we're going to have it so that as soon as you land with your first jump, it'll begin the timer starting the second jump. Or at least start the logic to be able to perform the second jump. Now I should mention that in my off-screen test, I found that the second jump did not go high enough, So what I'm doing now is making a quick adjustment to the advanced mover to create a higher jump. Now testing this, we can see that we have a jump that upon landing will begin a small window of time where we will then have the ability to perform a second higher jump. And you can always change the keyframes to get a different animation. You can also adjust the height of this jump using the advanced mover, as well as using the timer to adjust the window of opportunity you have to perform the second jump. Now for our third and final jump, we'll start by making a copy of the entire logic of the second jump, timer and all. Then we can go into the selector and we'll have the third output go into our new third jump. We can then open this up and adjust the height of our third jump via the advanced mover. Afterwards, we'll close this up and we'll go back over to our second jump, where we're going to be wiring the landing impact of this one into the third jump's timer. And then we'll have this timer's active output go right into the third selection. Then we can go back to the same timer, and we'll have it so that when this timer finishes, it'll revert back to the first selection. And we'll also have it so that in the third puppet interface, as soon as you land with your third jump, it'll reset as well back to its first selection. Now if you followed the logic exactly, we'll test this out and we can see that we now have a finished triple jump. With the logic now complete, and if you're happy with your result, you can just stop right here. You can also adjust the height of each jump, as well as alter the animation by tweaking each pose of the keyframes. But if you would like to continue, I'll also be going over how to make your character perform a flip in midair. We can start by deleting the first two keyframes of our chosen jump. In this case, I'll be going with the third jump. And as you can see, I've left the third jump descent intact. This will be useful when jumping to anything lower than our original starting point. Placing a timeline and attaching a keyframe to that timeline will start animating the flip. To help with symmetry, I'm turning on the puppet mirror tool, as well as turning on precision move, which as you can see, gives you a solid number to work with. This will help in making your rotations consistent, and will also give us a very smooth flip. When creating a flip animation, always create the flip from the point between the legs and the torso. This will ensure that your character rotates properly without any issue. And of course, remember to de-animate the heels should they ever get stuck while creating your pose. Now thanks to precision move, I can have each keyframe rotate the exact same amount as the previous, which will help us create a smooth motion. And remember to blend between each keyframe to help us get a consistent spin throughout the whole animation. From here, we're going to repeat the process until we have one single full rotation, or however many you decide. It's up to you. For the finished flip, I added a frame of a jump to make a better transition into the rotation. Now if I slowly scroll through this, you'll see that the character moves consistently between each frame. I also have the final frame of the timeline be the same as the one that we have when we are in our jump descent. With our finished flip, we'll have it so that as soon as we jump, it'll activate the timeline, which is set to play once. We can now see that when we jump for the third time, there is now a flip added to our jump. And you're going to want to play with the keyframes to make sure your transition is smooth. Now I've gone back in and taken my time and reanimated the jumps, but I've kept the logic intact and this is now where I'm at. I also added a short timeline with a roll that's set to activate upon the third jump's landing. Always experiment and see what works for you. But in this case, you're probably going to want to keep the logic the same to make sure that everything continues to work properly. That will conclude this video, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. Now go get some sleep and have sweet dreams.